So let's get into some free or cheap, what I'll call hustle tactics to help you generate more leads for your business. Now, first, let me start off by saying these kind of hustle tactics, back to what we talked about in the beginning, are difficult for you to scale up, especially if you are doing these things. Now, a lot of new real estate investors start by using hustle tactics. Often we have more time than money, so you utilize that time every way you can in your business. But you will run out of time if you're doing these things yourself, no doubt. And by the way, you have a business to run. You have lots of other things that need to be done. About some cheaper or even free, none of them are free because they use your time, lead generation tactics. So first, let's talk about driving for dollars. So driving for dollars is essentially driving around neighborhoods and looking for homes that look distressed and they appear to be distressed. Once you find those properties, there are several things that you could do with them. You could pull over and knock on the door. You could put out a door hanger. You could add them to a mailing list and start to mail them. You could add them to a list and skip trace, which is to find out the phone number, and then eventually cold call or text message market that person. So it really is the technique of basically just finding stuff that appears to be distressed and then trying to contact the seller one way or another. So some of the challenges with driving for dollars are it's not free because, as we all know, gas isn't free and your time isn't free. And so you're going to be spending money on those things. But secondly, while you can find some houses that appear to be distressed, they may not be actually distressed, and there could be a house right next door that doesn't look distressed that actually isn't a distressed situation. Let me give you an example. You might see that 123 Main Street has tall grass and a boarded up window or something that looks junky. It's got a broken down car in the driveway, and it looks like the type of house that if somebody had money or wasn't in a difficult financial situation, that the house wouldn't look that way. So maybe they're distressed and maybe they need to sell their house. Now, right next door could be grandma's house. She actually passed away last week, paid the house off 50 years ago, but it's neat and clean, and you would never add that to your list or never even market to them because you're looking for visual cues. Also, that distressed house might not actually even have any equity to market to them in the first place. So maybe they are distressed and that's just how they live, but they have no equity in the house and they have a mattress full of money even, right? But they don't necessarily need to sell the house at a discount, but it is a visual cue. Driving for dollars is also difficult to scale. Now, to be fair, when I first started, I actually spent a lot of time driving for dollars. We were driving around neighborhoods and trying to identify properties that appeared to be distressed. But it's very time consuming, and if you do it at scale, and I know some people that do, you can hire a team of people to drive around, and then some of the complications with that are you need to be using an app or some way so that your drivers are not driving the exact same streets, ultimately and duplicating your addresses and wasting a lot of time. Next, let's talk about door knocking. So similar to driving for dollars, it's essentially being in neighborhoods and just exactly what it says, knocking on doors and asking sellers if they'd be interested in selling. Now, there are techniques to this. This is not an approach that I have done, but I'm familiar with it. But most often you would probably say, I happen to be looking to buy a house in the neighborhood. Do you know anybody that would be interested in selling? Instead of saying, your house looks crappy. Would you be interested in selling your house to me? Is to be a little more indirect and try to discover other things that might be going on in the neighborhood. So similar to driving for dollars, this technique is very time consuming. It could take up a lot of your time. What I've advised students and people I've worked with in the past that have more time than money is that if you're going to knock doors, do it while you're on an appointment in a neighborhood. And while you're out there already on an appointment from a lead that you generated to make an offer, maybe find a couple of other houses in the area and write down the addresses and either start mailing to them or just knock on the door and see if you can find out what's going on. Now, if houses are very distressed, all boarded up, it's clear there's nobody living there, sometimes it might be helpful for you to knock on a neighbor or two's door. There's always the nosy neighbor in the neighborhood that knows everything that's going on. And the truth is if there was a boarded up house next to where I lived, I probably would know a lot more about it than if it wasn't, just because it's an eyesore in the neighborhood and everybody in the neighborhood wants to solve that problem. So door knocking, some of the pros and cons again are pros. It's relatively low cost. If you have more time than money, you can do that. The challenge is it does take a lot of time ultimately. Next, let's talk about networking for deals. This has always been an important part of my business, is building relationships with people that can actually bring me deals, but it is a hard one to scale. I do have some friends that have perfected this on large scale where they actually have relationship managers on their team. They have relationship managers that are attending events and really networking and generating leads on the behalf of the owner, you, right? So the way that I primarily did this was in the early years for me was myself. I was either sponsoring events or hosting events and building relationships, filling my pockets with business cards and trying to basically build relationships that I could nurture over a long period of time. Networking is an invaluable part of your business for sure, but again, it is hard to scale as a real estate investor. So most people would go to a RIA club or some event and their focus would be on getting as many contacts as possible, filling their pockets with business cards, only to come back to the office, put a rubber band around it, and throw it in a drawer somewhere. Ultimately, I don't believe networking is making contact with somebody. It's kind of the art of that, building that relationship over time, finding out what they're interested in, what are they looking for, and we're going to give us the context of buying houses, so versus selling, if you will. So finding people that come across deals. It could be other wholesalers. It could be real estate agents that might come across distressed properties that they have no interest in listing. It could be an example that has worked for me is I built a relationship very early on in my real estate investing career with an agent, and that was just through a random event, stayed in touch with him, and over the years, about every other year, he sends me a fire damaged property that he stumbled across because we talked about fire damaged houses at the time. And so he's kind of pigeonholed me as the guy that likes fire damaged houses, and everyone he comes across, as far as I am aware, brings those to me. But had I not continued that relationship, had a process to reach out to him every once in a while, that probably would have died off long before it really went anywhere. I will tell you, networking, just like in our other ways we generate leads, follow-up is really critical. At the end of the day, these are relationships you're trying to build. They meet lots of people like you. And how do you stand out? Well, it's to build relationships over time where you just reach out randomly, like, hey, I just thought of you. How's everything going? You could reference something they've said in the past. They're a Dallas Cowboys fan, and you could just reach out randomly, like, hey, football season's about ready to get started. Just thought of you. What do you think is going to happen this year? And those relationships go a long way. The truth is that lots of people are connected. I have 5,000 friends on Facebook, but I probably couldn't name 4,800 of them to you, right? So a lot of our relationships these days tend to be kind of shallow. So anytime you can build a real relationship with people, those are going to carry you a long way. Next, let's talk about SMS marketing or text message marketing. And that is going to be essentially lead generation. We're going to talk about in the context of you doing it yourself, because this entire masterclass is talking about scaling your business. And this is one of those things that if you're doing it yourself is impossible to scale. So it is actually fairly cheap, other than the cost of skip tracing, to get a list that you would skip trace, which is the act of kind of finding their phone numbers and maybe mailing addresses or things like that. But typically you start with the address and upload those addresses and get back phone numbers that you can call. So SMS marketing is essentially sending them texts. Now, you can do it right from your phone. There's a ton of apps that do this as well. Most people that are doing it at any sort of scale are using an app and maybe an application that actually is tied to your CRM so that all that data is in one place as you reach out to contacts that you might buy houses from. But it's a hard thing to scale ultimately, especially if you are doing it, because what tends to happen is you send out a burst of texts, maybe 100 or a couple hundred. Now, most people are not sending out batch texts, like sending out 10,000 text messages at a time or even 100. But there's a lot of legal pressure here on SMS and cold calling marketing that we're going to be talking about here that have essentially are trying to outlaw this if it's not already illegal to do. So in many states it might still be legal. In every state it is definitely a gray area at best, and the carriers are doing more and more to try to prevent you from even getting in touch with their clients, essentially. So they're, like Google, becoming ways to flag things as spam, except for from an SMS perspective, there is no spam folder. They just find a way to weed it out completely so you never even see it. So, but it is a legitimate way to market. And one of the things that I want to hopefully have you understand is that distressed sellers react differently to different forms of marketing. There are some people that look at every piece of mail they get. There are some people that immediately put it in a pile of, is this a bill or is this something that doesn't matter to me, and I just throw it away. There are some people that let their mailbox overflow for weeks at a time without checking it, right? Text messages have a very high open rate, and so there's some statistics I've seen before that I think there's like a 97 to 99% open rate on text messages, and even I myself look at every single text, even if I know it's spam, because I have to click on it to basically tell my phone to block calls and texts from this user, so I have to open it up no matter what. So text messaging has some pros and cons. The pros are it has a very high rate of getting seen as long as your phone number is good, and the cons are that it will be time consuming if you do this en masse to thousands or tens of thousands of people, and there's some legal ramifications as to whether SMS marketing is legal right now or not. And I can tell you that even if it is still legal, there definitely are people and businesses and your carriers and everybody else that are actively trying to prevent you from getting through to their customers. So next, let's talk about cold calling. And that is exactly as it sounds. It's just calling people that didn't reach out to you first. You're essentially interrupting somebody's day to try to get a hold of them to see if they're interested in selling their house. So that's been a practice that is relatively new in the real estate investing industry over the past few years. And similar to text message marketing, it has a lot of pressure on it as to whether it's legal or not. Some states it's clearly illegal. A lot of states, they're trying to make it illegal. And at any rate, the carriers are trying to prevent you from getting through to customers that didn't ask to be contacted by you. I'll say, even myself personally, I have an app on my cell phone that doesn't allow any call that's not in my list of contacts to come through and even ring. It literally just goes directly to voicemail because I don't want to get calls from people that I don't know. And if it's important, they'll leave a voicemail and I can check it later. So there's some pros and cons of cold calling. Again, it's relatively inexpensive in and of itself, but it is time consuming to try to call lots of people. Now, similar to text message marketing, most are not calling directly from their cell phone or their office phone. They're using an auto dialer or an application to call in scale, where the phone is ringing in the background and it might be trying to connect with multiple numbers at a time, and it drops all the other calls as soon as somebody actually answers. So cold calling has been a fruitful technique for the last few years for sure, but it's got some pressure on what we talked about. Those are the pros and cons.